Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are back after the summer break with the SAP IP Business Talks. And today we will talk about a topic which generates so much requests and discussions and very worthful connections that we decided we proceed with that topic again, simply because it seems that so many people are interested in that we go deeper in it. And some housekeeping rules for the ones who are not familiar with that format. So this is a LinkedIn live format. That means there is a chat, and when you make comments in the chat, or just like greetings, like Raluca David did. Thank you very much for that. So I see that here and I can bring that to the show. So when you have comments or questions which you would like to address, write it in the chat and we pick that up and we will discuss it. And today I'm together with Tomas Geerkens, and Thomas it is not necessary to introduce you anymore. So this is the third or the fourth live show which we have together, so everybody knows how did you came into the field of IP, and especially in your very specific topic of these licensing, monitoring, and structuring licenses, and that is really a fascinating topic. But first of all, I would say, please introduce yourself with some words and tell us what you're doing at Connor and what we are talking today about exactly.
Yeah, sure. Good to see you again, Alex, and obviously appreciate everybody for chiming in and joining. And so my name is Tomas Geerkens. I'm a director at Connor Consulting, and we, amongst other things, are specialized in let's say license compliance, specifically royalty auditing. We do a bunch of other stuff as well, which I think we'll touch on a little bit during this conversation, or at least I'd like to. But eventually, I think I wanted to also echo what you said. It's obviously a conversation between the two of us, but there's a live component to this. So anybody that does have questions, like please, don't be a stranger. Feel free to kind of ask questions or provide any insights. I'm happy to discuss those. I guess you said that people probably know who I am and maybe why I've chosen this profession, but maybe just to reemphasize in a way that the world of licensing specifically, obviously, is such a global world, and I just kind of really I love the way that this brings the world together almost and makes people with different capabilities work together in a very specific way that's designed to kind of add value to the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we see more and more businesses which are completely depending on licensing structures. And the more we see digital ecosystems and in every kind of IP, so in trademark or brand licensing, in copyright licensing, in patent licensing. So in all of that fields, we see real and grow in these ecosystems and this licensing volumes and the numbers of licensees. So obviously this is an emerging market, and all these reactions which we see on our live interviews, on the recordings, on your white papers, that shows us that this is really a topic which drives people around. So I would like to mention to all of you that Thomas runs his own page on the digital IP lexicon. You find it here on the topic of licensing controlling. This is here, and you find here all the details to Thomas. And what we talk about today is a new white paper which he gives you for free. So you just give us your email address and you get your download, so you can get it, this white paper. And I think that is something really new and very interesting. We would like to talk about that today, Thomas. So can you give us an overview? What's about this white paper, and who is the addressees, or who you want to get targeted with that, and what exactly is in it, which you give to the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I think overall, what we would just want to make sure is that we are providing enough intelligence and information and thought leadership as it relates to the license compliance and royalty compliance, not only from a licensor but also from a licensee perspective, ensuring that essentially people are aware of the tools that are out there in which they can potentially mitigate those risks. So sure we'll get into a little bit more of the details, but I think the philosophy with which I guess that we come, or that Connor comes to this specific niche of royalty compliance, is through the lens of proactive compliance rather than reactive compliance. And I think that is essentially the kind of the toolkit that we want to be able to provide, is that there's not a one size fits all approach. There are different ways to use different tools depending on the needs of your licensing portfolio, or the licensees even within that portfolio. And
Okay, let's jump in exactly here, because this is one of your key aspects, your cornerstones, which you mentioned, that these proactive compared to backward looking, let's say, okay. And I think last time we discussed that, and also we discussed it in the context of biotechnology, and it's always the same, so that problems can really stack on and become extremely complex over the time when you look backward. And so it makes absolutely sense to do that proactive, even when it is for some people contra-intuitive, because they see that as just a check of whether the things run right. But obviously you avoid a lots of problems when you do that proactive. So what do you think? Why should licensors, licensing leaders, let's say, care about that aspect of compliance today? So what is, so to speak, especially challenging today compared to, let's say, some years ago?
Right. Maybe let's talk about data, right? I think it's always a good place to start, some numbers and some tangibles. So maybe a question to the audience would be, either you type it out or you think about the answer, but how many percent of our audits uncover material discrepancies? And I'll just pause for a second to see if there's any reactions. But so out of all the audits that we do across any industry, be it pharma, be it biotech, be it music, be it trademark, there are 85% of our audits show that there is a material discrepancy between the royalties that were reported and the royalties that contractually had to be reported. And
Wow.
25% of that underreport over 100% of their royalties. So that means that they are paying less than half of what they should. So this isn't theory, right? This is what the data tells us. And what's interesting is that most of these cases aren't malicious. It's not about, kind of looking for the wrongdoer, in the sense that it is something that you're trying to police from that perspective. And that's where the mindset shift comes in, from reactive to proactive. So reporting oversights, system errors, ambiguities in the contracts, compliance isn't just about recovering those revenues, but it's also about ensuring clarity, fairness, and resilience across the board. So making sure that licensors and licensees can build those relationships together for future purposes also. So as you said, there's a backwards element to this. Yes, there's a look back period. Yes, there's a in the past looking type of element to this thing, but that's really just covering 50% of the entire value of what proactive compliance can be about, which is about looking forward and looking, hey, why did these errors occur? So it's not looking for what's wrong or whose fault it is. It's about correcting those errors so that
Yeah.
the agreement actually is better fit for purpose moving forward. So, to tie this up a little bit, we like to think of this as three kind of 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 of compliance. 1.0 being reactive and a little bit ad hoc, and maybe this one has where the reputation was a little bit more about policing, unfortunately.
Yeah, just looking for mistakes, so to speak,
Right,
or
yeah, and
misbehavior.
misbehavior, but red flags. Maybe there's a reason why you chose somebody specifically rather than having a best practice or process around, the compliance in general. And that's what we call 2.0. So 2.0 is proactive compliance, where it's done as a routine check. It's kind of like going to the doctor for a health check rather than waiting until, you're really sick to make sure that you're aligned on what that health means. And then compliance 3.0 is kind of where we're developing towards, is bringing AI into this as well, and bringing technology into this, where it becomes more about quicker health checks, less disruption, better pattern recognition, and just really faster, smarter, and more scalable, so that ultimately we can do our jobs a lot smarter.
Yeah, got you, got you. I mean, Bart Vanderhagen was made an estimation of around 50%, which I think it's already sportive, but these beyond 80% means it's absolutely clear signal. And what you say is this has nothing to do with the branch, with the industry. So this is a figure which comes from all the it's an average over all industries you're working in, right? So and can you give us an idea? Where comes that from? Is it the complexity? Is it the way how the licensing contracts are designed? Yeah, so maybe it's hard to understand. Is it the change on the personnel, so that the dynamic of the business? So what is it, or is it all together, which I mentioned?
I think a lot of the things that you mentioned are part of it. Maybe to nail down on let's say the most important ones would be ambiguity in let's say what defines a licensed product, what doesn't define a licensed product, and businesses aren't static. So licensees, they develop new things and new ideas, and they often make a judgment call based on what is a licensed product and not a licensed product. And the licensors have their own business to run as well. So it makes sense that we're all kind of focused on what our core and niche is. But with that said, as time continues, these little kind of errors creep up, and they extrapolate over time. So I'll give you one example. It's always nice to think about examples. So,
Yes, please.
and this is really a special one. So, for example, typically you would report in the fiat of the currency that is in the contract, but we've had instances where accidentally, let's say that the dollar value was used, but it should have been reported in euros. So there's obviously there's exchange rate that comes into this that wasn't let's say used to convert the currency into the actual reporting currency. So you can imagine if you use a currency that is highly inflated or deflated versus the other currency, this can have very material impacts. And
Wow.
again, just a one check with this licensee, just one kind of due diligence, and can be done very easily. Already revealed such a kind of vast amount of misreporting. And it wasn't malicious, right? It was a systematic error. Nobody did this on purpose to be wrong.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
really just about making sure that we look for those areas where risk is, and the more complexity, the more risk.
Yeah. And what what you're saying is the earlier you get a grip on these issues, the better is it to avoid this
Right.
staggering, this cumulation of
Right.
topics and issues, and also the value of the mistake,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I would almost suggest to go out and Google some of these big cases that were out there where royalty audits revealed just massive amounts of underreporting, which led to lawsuits, which led to just amount of time and energy wasted into
Yeah,
doing something 10 years down the line because there was maybe a red flag, rather than doing this every 3 to 5 years and treating this as a constructive exercise, where you allow to clear these out. It's better to catch, if we had to put a number to this, which is just kind of hypothetical, it's better to catch a discrepancy of 100,000 in 3 years than to extrapolate that into 10 years and then catch 2 million, which could ultimately maybe lead to bankruptcy even, which
yeah.
no licensor would want their licensee to go bankrupt, right? It's about a partnership. So it's really about helping each other more than it is about kind of looking for the who's wrong kind of. It's an error correction mechanism basically.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, no, I got you. I mean, let's come back to the white paper. So when these compliance matters, and I think out of the last 10 minutes, it becomes clear that this is an issue, and when this matters so much. So I would say there should be a kind of guideline or checklist or certain hints what licensors and licensees how they should approach in practice. Can you give us an overview on that, or some specific hints? What is especially important?
Sure. Yeah. I think what we talked about just now was kind of the why. Why is this kind of important? What's the philosophy behind it? And then now we touch upon the how. And the how is, let's say, where the details matter, because if you're developing a licensing portfolio and whatever scale you are on, you will have to use different tools to make sure that what you're doing is also fit for purpose. Meaning, you cannot do a royalty audit across your entire licensee portfolio. That would make no sense, and it wouldn't even help the licensee. So that really doesn't help anybody. So what we like to propose is different tiering of your licensee base, where you have your top tier, you have your mid tier, and your long tail. And these typically have like 80-20 type principle, let's say deviations, where 20% of your revenue is with 80% of your long tail, and 80% of your revenue is with 20% of your top licensees. So what we've tried to do is develop for every kind of tier is a methodology that is appropriate for that risk category. And the risk
Yeah.
categories can be, for example, oh, there are small licensees. They are low in risk in the sense that they don't report a lot, but who knows that they know what they should be reporting. So there's a different dynamic to addressing that long tail, which we use technology for. We use scalable solutions for that don't require vast investments from licensor, licensee, or even us. And it's really just kind of making sure that there's health checks and kind of these things in play. And that, I think, feeds to your question, Alex, is that we like to work with data. We like to work with not only our intuitions, which are important, of course, the tribal knowledge that our clients have is very important, but we also like to add on some extra, let's say, mathematics to it, so that we're making these decisions grounded in mathematical risk and reality, to make sure that we're not just cherry picking. And that is the proactive mindset, where you're doing this with a philosophy of a best practice and a due diligence and a process you can rely on. Because licensing revenue is very important for our clients, if not the most important. Yet the amount of, let's say, lack of due diligence that happens around that revenue is something that we found to be kind of, I wouldn't want to use the word alarming necessarily, but there's room for improvement, let's say.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, interesting enough that licensing becomes such a value creation mechanism on the one hand, and at the same time, on the other hand, it is not managed in the same way like the classical, let's say, physical value creation. So this is a tricky situation, because we have this. Licensing is a classical example for the inverted firm. So for the licensor is using complementary assets, production assets from third parties to generate their own income, and that's why that's the way how you can see licensing, and that makes it so tricky, because you are not inside of these other firms which make the production or the business for you, so to speak, and you get just your license.
Yeah.
But that is the tricky thing, that you need a certain kind, let's call it management of these resources and an understanding, and that has all to be in this licensing contract. And sometimes it is just focusing on the royalty rate and some minor issues, so to speak, which comes out of negotiation. But at the end, the question is, how good do the licensor understand the value creation at the licensee, to understand how to whether the licenses are correct or not, and that is a completely different game. And at the same time, the licensee has typically difficulties to match the value creation in their own companies compared to what the licensing contract is saying. I mean,
Right.
that is really tricky, and because we see that more and more, we need really that management understanding of the whole thing. And management means also being proactive and not just reactive to let's say, when things go wrong. So I'm expecting from a manager that they try to to create the best possible environment
Right.
for growth and for business, and not just extinguishing fires around the production. And I think that is the perspective we should more and more have to licensing monitoring, that it is a part of the licensing management, right?
Right, and I agree. And obviously, if you look at the licensing industry as a whole, I forget what the recent numbers were. It was like 350 billion or something in 2024, and that number
Wow.
is not going down anytime soon. It's actually increasing because of the value of IP and how IP is being commercialized, right? So there is a certain kind of element to what problems are we solving here with the priorities of the business. So I think the complexities just add more insecurity around the due diligence of those revenue streams. On both sides, right? Both on licensee and licensor side. You equally, as a licensor, you don't want your licensees to be overpaying you systematically, because ultimately that means they're not running their business in the way that they've agreed to running, that part of the revenue as it relates to that percentage, right, of a royalty, potentially. So in the white paper also we talk about this a little bit, right? There's concerns typically about predictability. There's obviously proportionality, transparency, and how do we continuously improve upon these things? And I think that's something that often maybe licensees worry about, is like, oh, this is going to take so much time. This is going to be something that's going to be a hassle to our business. And why do you choose me? Don't you trust me? Those kind of very, very rational kind of concerns to have. And that's where the proactive mindset helps to kind of let's say help polish out those uncertainties. So there's fears around operational disruption, like I said, but there's also just making sure that we treat everybody as human beings here, and everybody is actually trying to do the right thing. And having an audit, same as having a tax audit, same as having a financial audit, isn't about we think you did something wrong and we want to kind of get you or punish you for that. No, audits are done because we are all humans and we all make mistakes. And as time changes, systems are implemented, systems are changed. People leave the business as well and do the handovers maybe not as accurately as possible. So it's really just about safeguarding that you are ensuring that the revenue is in the right P&L eventually, because we all thought, licensors and licensees really spend a lot of time in getting the contracts to where they are. Yet afterwards, it kind of just lays on the shelf, and nobody really kind of looks back at this and says, like the currency example I gave you just before, like that is a very easy thing to miss, and it's also a very easy thing to correct. And
Yeah.
there's really a lot of these examples out there.
Yeah, I think so. What I experience is a kind of misunderstanding. When we all come from the experience of when I'm buying in the morning a pretzel at the bakery. So this is a transaction, and we come from a transaction-oriented world where business means making transactions, and there is a price, and I have to pay, and when I pay the price, I get the good, and that's it.
Right.
And to a certain extent, that's it. So, which means when I want to complain about the quality of the pretzel or whatever, that are difficult issues, taking a long time, and whether I will be successful or not, we will see. Okay, but we separate the two businesses, the bakery and the hungry guy, by these transactions. The transaction does not bring them together. It is a separation mechanism which has clear rules, which are very well implemented in the private law of buying something. Yeah.
Right.
So according to German law, you have 3 contracts at the same time when you just buy a pretzel, and in licensing, this is a completely different situation. So you are really you are integrated in the business of the other, and that makes it so, let's say, challenging to be sure that everybody behaves, so to speak, right. And that is the tricky thing. So obviously the licensor has a huge interest as the licensee grows and makes its business well. In a transaction, you don't care. I'm selling you that, and what you're doing after that is, it's your business.
Well, let me maybe take your bread analogy, and it's very fitting that a German brings up bread as an analogy. I'm Belgian, so I'll bring up beer maybe as an analogy. Um, But if I were to say to you, and hey, I want a blonde beer, right? Because the contract says that I'm due a blonde beer, but the contract actually specifies no, it's not just that blonde beer; it's a different blonde beer. But I ask the bartender, give me that blonde beer, and he just chooses whatever, and I don't really pay attention, and I get the wrong beer. I think that is also the analogy here that I think we're trying to make, is that it's not because you think it's the right brown bread or blonde beer, that doesn't mean contractually it was that brown bread or that blonde beer. So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's my point. That de facto transactions are not an integration mechanism. It's a separation mechanism, so that everything is fine separated, and we only make this transaction when we have a licensing contract. We have to stay attractive for each other. So both
exactly.
parties have to stay attractive. The licensor to the licensee to the licensor. And
Right.
that makes it challenging because there are separated entities, separated businesses, maybe in all aspects, different strategies. Just in this one aspect of the licensing contract, we have the same interests. And that is
Exactly.
really, from a management perspective, very challenging. So when it comes to terminology, okay, also in your white paper, I mean, when people are not so familiar with that, so you mentioned there at least benchmarking, so the role of benchmarking for strengthening these agreements, also the role of MFN. So maybe you explain that a little bit, what it
Yeah.
means, and also the role of the technology which plays which comes here into play, simply to reduce disputes which are typically based on misunderstandings. Can you
Yeah.
explain us that a little bit more in detail?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. And I think what's maybe a little bit different about this session that we're doing is that we're not only talking about how to help licensors and licensees through the lens of the royalty compliance part of the game, if you will, or part of the problems that we're solving, but we're also talking about it from a licensee-centric added value component. So when we talk about, for example, tools like benchmarking tools, which are valuable if you are a licensee that is potentially buying a lot of IT, buying a lot of software, but in the wild west of all the software that's out there, you're not necessarily sure that you're getting the right value from your contract. So a couple of tools that I wanted to maybe just bring up during this conversation is that, hey, let's not forget that there's a running revenue kind of royalty component to this, where a lot of error correction mechanisms can be held as a process and do due diligence around that. But then there's also other aspects. If you are a licensee, you are also able to prevent, let's say, revenue leakage from your angle as well. So making sure that or that you're aware that there are benchmark tools out there as well that we could also offer and help with, where you can look to make sure that you're paying the right price for something. And then as it relates to MFNs, which are most favored nation clauses, which typically safeguard licensees to make sure that they're actually competitive in the market by negotiating an MFN clause, which means that you are allowed to have a certain, let's say, pricing for a specific product that is licensed, then that a lot of the time is also not very much enforced. So a lot of these MFN clauses that licensees have are not really checked. So how would you know that the licensor is still providing you with what the most favored nation's pricing is if you don't once in a while do a check to make sure that those standards are being upheld? Which in our experience also is, again, there's a lot of like low hanging fruit there to make sure that you're capturing all that value. So there's a little bit of different tools as well as the technology side of things. So as we're going into the new wild west, if you will, of technology, where there's artificial intelligence at the tip of our fingers, we are also obviously making those investments to make sure that we're bringing that to compliance, compliance 3.0, as I was talking about before, and we actually make sure that we use these tools to do, amongst other things, like web scraping, pattern recognition, continuous monitoring, reducing, let's say, the labor and the amount of time needed from either party to make sure that you have, again, it's not going to be certainty, but you're going to have a process that you can rely on and that you can inform your stakeholders about, right? That is kind of how we see it. It's taking your IP seriously to the degree that you want to make sure that the contracts are upheld in the way that they were designed to be executed upon. Um, the white paper calls out a little bit more about these specifics and talks about also licensee concerns from a royalty audit perspective. And it really tries to bring together a little bit of I think, a value add to anybody who's willing to kind of look into this or wants to look into this, and where to start. And I think that's also sometimes where clients get a little confused is, where do I start with this? Like, all right, they understand why, they kind of understand the how, and all right, the tools are out there, but all of this is just too overwhelming for me. I don't know where to start. I don't want to disrupt my business, so I'm just gonna let business as usual kind of continue, and I'll just kind of in the back of my mind knowingly kind of accept that I'm not getting, let's say, the full amount of spectrum of revenue that I'm contractually due. And for that, I would say
Yeah, got it.
there is, yeah, right. And for that, I would say there are ways to do this very easily and incrementally. It's not doing everything overnight. It's starting where the pain points are today, and it's starting, and that's what the white paper also is trying to help with, is for you to identify where are you in this journey and what makes most sense. And of course, we are all very active on LinkedIn, so please, don't be shy as well. To anybody watching, feel free to reach out as well. I'm more than happy to kind of help out and guide you through those uncertainties.
Okay, so my take-home message for the moment is that there are tools out there, so which means it's not necessary and to a certain extent not meaningful to invent the wheel again. So it is much more efficient to use the experience. So for me, a tool is a kind of aggregated experience, and typically it makes much more sense to drive on existing roads compared to develop or invent your roads on your own. And trusting tools makes a lot of sense. I mean, tools don't they cannot overcome a misunderstanding. They cannot overcome a lack of understanding, but they can overcome a lack of experience. And I think that is a very important message here for the moment, that there are tools which are tested, which are implemented in many cases, and are quite successful in overcoming challenges. And to trust them could make a lot of sense for people
Yeah,
who feel they are not experienced in this specific situation, or with a specific, you mentioned these 80/20 licensing revenue. So maybe there are certain specific complex situations where I'm not familiar with, and then that could be a signal to use or to try to adapt that kind of tools, or at least to be consulted in how to use that. Is that correct?
yeah, exactly. And maybe a good analogy would be, for example, if I don't know if anybody plays golf that listening, but you use different clubs for different parts of the game, right? And also when you're learning how to golf, there's also little incremental upgrades and changes that have to happen for you to get where you want to go. So equally so, I would say rely on third parties that do these type of things. It doesn't need to be us, of course, but happy to help, and we can then diagnose where the next logical smallest next step is.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you know, as you said, it's kind of it's the unknown unknowns, right? It's people,
yeah,
if you don't know, then there's no point in changing. And I think that's all what we're trying to do, is trying to shed light on. There's a lot of stuff out there that we're unaware of due to the nature of how these agreements are set up, and due to other business reasons, like confidentiality, for example, which makes sense in a license or licensee relationship. But there is an unknown unknown that once you leave licensee and you've onboarded them or you've educated them, really it's up to their own devices, right, to make sure that they're getting it right. And they misunderstand also what the licensor typically understands within the contract, because we're all humans. We all have our own ways of looking and interpreting things. And that's, I think, ultimately really our goal, is to bring licensor and licensee closer together to what the original intent of the contract was. And if that intent has let's say, no longer fit for purpose, and let's say the future has gone to a place where a different type of agreement needs to be put into place, or an amendment needs to be put forward because the contract didn't capture those initial realities, then let's have that conversation constructively, but do it based on data. Do it based
Yeah.
on a factual representation of what the contract says and what the reality says. And then that conversation between licensor and licensee will provide a more healthy collaboration moving forward.
Yeah,
Um,
I think this is a very important point, that we live in a that unprecedented dynamic environment, business environment. So that it is very important continuously to check whether the overall provisions, or the spirit, the logic with which the contract was made, whether that fits already or not, and not just based on, let's say, feelings. Ideally,
yeah,
it's based on data, so we have a certain basis to talk about that.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
when we yeah, thank you. So when we I would like to use the last minutes to look a bit ahead. So when we compare, let's say, let's call that the laggards and the leaders. So in every business, in every technology, we always have companies which want to be, sometimes willing, sometimes unwilling. They are simply the leaders, because they do something which is not common, or which sets them apart. They have a better understanding, a better perspective. They want to be the leader. So for whatever reason, and on the other hand, we have laggards, companies which maybe don't want to license, or they don't see another alternative, whatever, but or they are very conservative. They are afraid of adapting. So when we try, just for the sake of this discussion, when we want to separate uh, licensors in leaders and laggards, um, what would you say are meaningful, ideal first steps, practical first steps, to go into that field, and to also to make themselves familiar with the opportunities,
Right,
the challenges, the pros and cons in that field?
right. A good question, and I always try to just present the best arguments, I guess, and let people make up their own minds in terms of the value they could potentially see into certain aspects of something that could change. So I'm hoping to present those arguments here as persuasively as I can. Um, so to me, a license compliance or licensing leader takes into consideration the data, right? And the data is, again, 85% of licensees underreport materially. And think about what you could have done with all that revenue that was in the wrong P&L. And again, we're not even talking about should it be on the licensor side or licensee side. The reality of the matter is licensees obviously try to get it as right as they can, but the incentive structure is not that they will over pay their royalties. The incentive structure is they want to manage their costs, and so the underpaying of royalties just makes more sense from an incentivization structure in reality. That doesn't mean they don't try to get it right. They do. That's why it's not about bad faith behavior, but more about error correction mechanisms. But understanding the reality of that revenue that's being misattributed in the wrong P&L, I would just ask the question, imagine how much of that revenue stream you could have spent in developing your own R&D, in making your IP better, in investing into your company to become a better licensor, and even are able to outcompete other licensors that are maybe adjacent or competitors of yours. So, bringing that ecosystem together and ensuring that you have a best practice in place that not only satisfies your stakeholders, because obviously, your stakeholders will be very interested in knowing how are you accounting for those royalty streams. And something we hear from time to time is, yeah, but we have a professional, potentially a big four accounting firms, and they have checked the books. And obviously, that's very good that there's just a kind of a general accounting, financial accounting, books and records audit going on, but they do not drill deep enough on the level of the royalty streams, and the due diligence isn't done because the materiality is different on those type of engagements, and that's ultimately where we find having a best practice around royalty revenue specifically is a differentiator out there as a licensor, not only for your own sake, but for your licensee's sake, because it actually proves back to the market saying, hey, we have a mechanism that makes sure that even if you overpay us, we have a mechanism that makes sure that you eventually find that out. And we're not interested in getting more than what we're contractually due. We're interested in getting what we're contractually due. And that's,
Yeah, what you're
yeah,
saying is, I think, an accountant would do is, chartered accountant. They just
yeah,
check, right? So they just check the figures. But I mean, that is not your approach. So you, especially when it is created in a proactive approach, you try to improve the business relationship in general,
right,
and not just checking and coming with so typically
right.
these chartered accountants are not paid for anything to improve it, or to make suggestions how this relationship could be improved based on the licensing contract, simply because they are not experts in licensing contracts and licensing relationships. I mean, that is, for me, that is obvious, that yes, a chartered accountant could come on with figures, but the solution, the improvement, the relationship is a completely different issue here.
Also, but I would just like to add that, if a licensee's books and records have been kind of gone through a financial audit, the materiality of their royalty payments to external parties aren't material enough to
Yeah,
for
yeah.
for that financial
In
accountant to go
addition, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
addition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's about, again, I think it's about taking your IP seriously. It's about having a process that you can rely on without having to kind of think at, when you wake up at night, oh, did we do that? And I'm obviously being a little bit tongue in cheek here, but at least you have something that from a process perspective that you can rely on, that your stakeholders can rely on, and it just differentiates you in the market because it allows you to capture the full value of your royalty revenue, essentially.
yeah, yeah. So that are wonderful final words to get the full revenue. Thank you very much, Thomas, again, for that insightful discussion on, in this case, on your white paper, which gives lots of insights. And I hope that you are also in the after show parties of the next hour available on LinkedIn, that people can
Sure.
ask questions and that you will answer. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Maybe just to sign off from my side here, Alex, is that if anybody does feel like, please reach out, a direct message, or even an email. My email is thomas@connor-consulting.com. Always available to have a discussion, and I'm sure we could find a way for you to maybe take that next step in the journey. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Appreciate everybody's time.
even And even when you don't find Thomas for whatever reason, so contact us, IP Business Academy, or me directly, and we make the contact, obviously. So Thomas, by the way, is one of our IP subject matter experts at the IP Business Academy. And when you want to work with European companies, when you want to get a better reach out to them, and you want to be seen, visibility, and when you want to directly work with companies which have a certain issue which you address, so get in contact with us. We are happy to support and to bring you to the users of the IP system who are in need. And here is the call for subject matter experts, and we will give you that also on LinkedIn. And we are on LinkedIn because we want to communicate, we want to interact. We're happy to interact with you, and go directly to Thomas for that issues. And when you want to be with us on such topics, we are happy to interact with you. So for the moment, thank you very much, Thomas. And I have the feeling
Thank you.
the last one. We talked about that. And I wish you a wonderful Wednesday, and thank you very much. And to the audience, bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.